Hi, and good morning. I'm in Atlanta. There's an interesting travel log element to these videos because it seems like I'm always in different places. I don't know that I've made one of the three that I've made. I've made one from Portland or two from Portland. I made one from Brooklyn. I made another one from Brooklyn, which I didn't post, which I'll tell you about in this post. And then now I'm in Atlanta. So, behold, Atlanta. What's exciting for me today, and what is a total first, is that I have a top comment. I have a comment on a Huffington Post article that is the top comment. I got 8 likes on my comment, and I didn't realize that on Huffington Post, if you, sorry, I'm just going to adjust the height of this because I want to sit straight up for my posture. If you get enough likes, your comment is moved to the first comment when people read an article. So even though my comment is a response to someone, it's presented at the top. So it's like when you read it, I'm immediately talking to a person that you've never heard of and whose comment you haven't read. And I address him by name at the top of my comment. My comment also appears in the body of the comments in a subthread where it's clear what I'm responding to, and that's interesting to me that there's a mechanism for duplicating the top comment and moving it to the top, but also keeping it in context. So interesting, I didn't know that there were systems for this. But I was excited. I was excited when I saw it like I had really achieved something. Like this is all going somewhere, arguing in the comments with people. Strange bit of feedback that I wasn't expecting that has totally made my day. And also there's total drama, a lot of drama and excitement and ups and downs to this post, and I'm going to tell you the whole story of it today. Sit back. So the last post I did where I was ragging on Inhofe, and I was reading all the comments about people having a rag-on session about James Inhofe. I have a good friend who watch it. There's 18 people who watch this, and one of them is a guy who I know really well and who's really smart. And he commented on that post, and it was a little bit of a hey, why should we care about reducing carbon emissions when there's India and China? What's the point? I was like, oh, that's interesting. So you can see it on my last video. I commented well, I think there's a lot of reasons to care. Number one, India and China are doing a lot. By the way, everyone should know that India announced just last week, they committed to 100 gigawatts of solar by 2022. That's an enormous amount of solar energy. Right now, the US and China, each one is adding maybe anywhere between 12 and 15 gigawatts a year. So India wants to add, I guess basically that would put them on track to add as much as we're adding. But 100 gigawatts is a lot, especially considering that a few years ago there was a report by an organization, I forget all these acronyms, but an acronymed organization expected there to be 480 gigawatts worldwide. By then, that's not include, now add India to that prediction. That's now 580 gigawatts. It's huge. Anyway, that was the point of my response. There's a lot to be positive about, but really, the reason to care is that if you don't care, then I think that leads to complacency or moral complicity. And it's also moral relativism. They're not doing a good thing. Why should I do a good thing? Do a good thing because it's worth doing a good thing and because you have to live according to your own virtues. That's really all that you can do. That was the gist of my response. And then this friend of mine, he responded with something that completely tied me in knots, which was, he said that he's noticed that a lot of people who believe in climate change are more interested, this is his words, more interested in mastering the debating than they are in moving the ball forward. And I can't help but kind of laugh because now I've been saying that I'm really into mastering debating. It's obvious. It's so easy. That's low-hanging fruit. I can't not laugh at that. But I am interested in mastering debating, and I want to be masterful at mastering debating. I think what was hard about that comment for me, there's a couple things that were hard. Number one is if you've watched any of these this extensive series of videos, this being number 4, you'll know that he totally called me out on something, which is that I am interested in mastering debating on this topic. So like, I felt busted, but also I felt like, how is that a deficiency? Like, how is that a weakness that I want to be good at debating? And I realized that like, this is something that has happened in this sphere for a long time, which is that, and I'll tie it together in a larger sense later, but to a degree I've seen that people's strengths have been called weaknesses. And that is very upsetting to me. Why is it a weakness that I want to be good at debating this topic? It's like, you know, you could be like, hey, look at that jerk with his awesome jeans. Dumb jeans. That would be a crime because everyone knows that having awesome jeans is cool. But if you say it as if you're impugning awesome jeans, then suddenly you can make awesome jeans sound dumb. And I think that's unfair to jeans. Look at that guy who's so good at Dark Souls 2. What a jerk. Everyone knows that being good at Dark Souls 2 is hard and awesome. So why would you say it as if it's a bad thing? This is like, I mean, my friend isn't a bully at all, but I think it is something that bullies do, is they just turn your strengths against you, and that really frustrated me. So at first I posted a long response to him where I got really mad, and then I deleted it. What I decided to do is sort of channel all those feelings into another post, and this is leading me to the post that is the top post with 8 likes. So the next day, on Huffington Post, there was Father's Day. It was on Father's Day. There's an article from the Holy Father to every father, our kids need us to act on climate change. It was written by John Friedrich, who runs a group called Climate Parents. And the post was basically, it's like a call to arms saying that, you know, we're running out of time on climate change, and for the sake of our children, we need to act. And then it invoked passages from the papal encyclical on climate change, which I'm still blown away by and thrilled about. Thanks, Pope. Although there is something in there about abortion, I haven't read it closely. Still psyched about what he wrote. So I scroll down to the comments section on this Father's Day article on Huffington Post. And the first post is by a guy named William H. Let's call him that. Very short post. He writes, sounds great, but the reality is that climate change we have been experiencing is caused by the sun and the oceans, and man does not have the power to change it. That's it. That's all he writes. Sounds great, but the reality is that the climate change we have been experiencing is caused by the sun and the oceans, and man does not have the power to change it. So that's all he writes. What's interesting here is that, you know, because I've been obsessed with comments on climate articles for so long, 2 years ago, that would have been like every comment. It actually would have been even more vitriolic against John Friedrich and against the position that he's taking. I mean, people used to just like shit on anyone who believed in climate change. Full stop. Of like pages of shitting on those people. Now, there'll be a comment like William H's comment, and it's like right away people are fighting back. And I love seeing that. You can tell that there's a popular mental sea change towards defending the position that climate change is happening. So right away, he has this simple, overgeneralized, you guys are all wrong type comment, and everyone jumps on him. So in like 3 posts later, he tries to fight back, and he employs a tactic that a lot of climate change deniers use, and it's very ironic. They start employing tons of technical sciencey sounding language to refute the idea that climate change is happening. It's the beginning of a total mindfuck, and I think it's a representation of the state of mind fucked upness that climate science deniers are in. Using science language to refute science. They're using science language in a shotgun approach that they're talking about things they don't understand. I've said this before and I'll say this again. I think a lot of climate science deniers are quickly searching the internet for any piece of information that can support their argument and then throwing it at you like magic. They're blowing smoke in your face. And he does this with aplomb. I'm going to read you his paragraph. I'm just going to read it to you, and I'm going to explain it, actually. I'm going to explain what he's referring to. It's very boring and impossible to follow, and that's actually the point. That's the point of it. So just let me read it, let it wash over you, and then I'll explain it. He writes, the IPCC generated a plethora of climate models in part to provide evidence that anthropomorphic global warming is real. To date, their models have been wrong. They have predicted global warming that has not occurred. Yet others have generated models that do not include CO2-based global warming that adequately explain what has happened since the Maunder minimum and up to and including the current pause in global warming. These models show that climate change is correlated with integrated total solar activity and ocean-related oscillations. If CO2 really affects climate, then it would do so by causing a change in the radiant thermal insulation properties of the atmosphere. If that is the case, then the increase in CO2 that has been occurring should cause a noticeable increase in the natural lapse rate in the troposphere. But that has not happened. Man's burning of fossil fuels is clearly not to blame for the ice age cycling. The previous interglacial period was warmer than this one, with higher sea levels and more ice cap melting, yet CO2 levels were lower than today. Clearly, man's burning of fossil fuels are not to blame. So there's like all this language in there. It talks about the Maunder minimum, which is something I'd never heard. Another reason I love doing this is there's terms I've never heard, people using them, and I'm like, oh, that's a new tactic I should learn. Lapse rate? What the fuck is the lapse rate? It's like... This guy with his... I'm going to do it. I'm going to use the same tactic. This guy with his lapse rate. So, despite all of this technical prestidigitation in his post, I seized on the last sentence, which I read as, clearly man's burning of fossil fuels are not to blame. I mean, I read it as that because that's what's written. So I wrote this really, really blistering response to him where I like fucking both barrels, boom, 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 really mad, madder than normal. Then I posted it, then I started doing a video on it. And while I was doing the video, I realized something. Here's a little flashback to what I recorded 2 days ago in the morning in Brooklyn before I came here. Here's a flashback. He uses a lot of sciencey phrases, like a lot of science. And he ends with saying, clearly man's burning of fossil fuels was not to blame. The previous... Oh. I gotta delete my comment. Okay, something kind of uncool happened. I totally attacked someone for no reason, and so I just deleted it. He ends with saying, the previous interglacial period was warmer than this one, with higher sea levels and more ice cap melting, yet CO2 levels were lower than today. Clearly, man's burning of fossil fuels was not to blame. You know, it was his certainty that, like, tipped me off that he was wrong, but he's right. He's right in that clearly man's burning of fossil fuels was not to blame in the previous interglacial period, because... you know, we didn't have men then, or industry. William H., if you saw the post that I put up, it was up there for about an hour. I deleted it. This is 2 posts in 2 days that I put up and then deleted. I apologize. It was uncalled for. Came to Atlanta, and I reworked my response. And this is the response that has 8 likes, top comment. Here's my response. The gist of it is that there are several red flags to me in what he's writing. The first being that he's so certain about what he's talking about. I mean, he's absolutely dead certain. His language is unequivocal. And that to me is a dead giveaway. There's an article on BuzzFeed, and if I remember correctly, the title was How I Came to Jesus on Global Warming. And it's a guy who was a climate reporter for a long time and bought into climate denial for a long time and started to sort of believe in the theories about climate change. And one day he was interviewing a climate science skeptic, and at the end of the interview he said, "What are the chances that you're wrong?" And the guy said, "No chance, I'm definitely right." And then he interviewed an actual climate scientist, and he's like, what are the chances you're wrong? And that guy said, well, somewhere between 5 and 25% chances that I'm wrong, depending on various factors. And he realized, he called this the nut test. The scientist who acknowledged the possibility he was wrong, that person passed the nut test. The guy who said there's no chance I'm wrong failed the nut test. And this was like a really clear expression of this thing that I'd been struggling with, which was that scientists who talk like scientists have been excoriated for talking like scientists, whereas people like William H., who are so sure of themselves, can convince people because of their certainty, but their certainty, that is wrong. There's no place for that. The only reason I have such conviction, and again, this is a little bit of an irony, but the only reason I have such conviction is that I'm not an expert, but there is a consensus amongst people who are experts. A 97% consensus says that this is the problem. And that is what I trust. I trust the consensus, the 97% consensus, over the 5 people who say, for sure, I'm right. I'm the Galileo of my age because no one agrees with me, that proves I'm right because I'm going against the grain, and that must mean that my convictions are stronger. I don't buy that. So, all of that aside, what I wanted to do was confront William H. on not only his tone, but on the details that he's trying to cite. I think that what William H. did in this post is what they all do, which is that he's just running out to the internet and he's grabbing details and he's thrusting them in my face as an effort to sound smart and confuse people. I don't think he's a scientist because he doesn't sound like a scientist. He sounds like a guy who's desperately trying to convince you that he sounds smart. So let's talk about the Maunder minimum. What is the Maunder minimum? I Googled it. I found a paper. Of course, I found a paper that was linked to on What's Up With That. It's an anti-science website. So I read the paper. The paper itself, I don't understand it. I don't know what it means. It's a very esoteric theory on cosmic solar wind and how solar wind affects cloud formation, and that there's ebbs and flows in solar radiation, not total solar output and solar irradiance, but certain types of gamma rays, I think. I could be getting this totally wrong. I genuinely have no idea what they were talking about. But I'll jump to the very end of this paper. Quote, the amplification of the 22-year cycle in cosmic rays at grand solar minima may be able to explain some of the complex features of climate change at this timescale. That's how the paper itself ends. It's an example of the way that climate science deniers expropriate pieces of scientific thought and express them as certain examples that they are right. This paper ends with a very gentle offering that is full of complexity. In fact, it includes the words complex. May explain some of the complex phenomenon. That's all it says. Nowhere in this paper does it say carbon dioxide is not to blame. In fact, if you search the paper for the word carbon dioxide or the term CO2, it doesn't exist in the paper at all. So how is it possible that William H. can say that this phenomenon excludes CO2 when the people who are researching it don't even address CO2? They're saying it may account for some of it. Well, a lot of things may account for some of it. I farted several times in the last decade and 20 years. That may account for some of the warming, but doesn't explain all of it. And it certainly doesn't correspond to the consensus amongst 97% of climate scientists that the climate change we are seeing right now is due to CO2. How can he, from his armchair, use this esoteric theory on cosmic wind to say that CO2 has nothing to do with it when the researchers themselves never even touch that idea? And then how can he throw this in your face as this is the explanation? I call bullshit. The lapse rate. Talks about the lapse rate. The lapse rate is as you go higher in the troposphere, that's the first layer of the atmosphere, the temperature gets lower. That is called the lapse rate. It's the rate at which temperature gets lower. His paragraph, I'm not going to reread it to you, but basically he's saying that if global warming was happening, the lapse rate would increase, meaning there'd be a greater temperature differential between the immediate bound of the troposphere and the higher bound of the troposphere, that this would be getting hotter, and so this being cooler, there'd be a greater difference in here. And he's saying the lapse rate isn't increasing, and so therefore global warming or greenhouse effect, or whatever you want to call it, isn't happening. So, all right, so I had to look up lapse rate and figure out what that is. And I found a website which was really good. It's called And Now There's Physics, or I think it's called that. There's a link to it in my top 8 likes post. I'll stop doing this. It got old. Could you see it that it got old when I did it such a half-assed way in the last time I did that little bit. I subscribed to And Then There's Physics, but And Then There's Physics takes on this idea that the lapse rate should increase. No, as global warming increases, the lapse rate stays the same. I honestly don't. I read all the particulars. Again, I don't understand them. But here's the point. He found a website that says the lapse rate should increase, and it doesn't. But I found a website that says that theory's wrong. So you know what? 1-to-1, we're even. The point, again, if they're going to reach out into the bowels of the internet and just find technical bullshit to say that this isn't happening, I can do that too. So maybe he's right, maybe I'm right, but you don't know. 1-to-1. So fuck it. Let's remove that from both of our arguments and not make any decisions based on that. That means you can ignore all this lapse rate shit that he says because he doesn't know what he's talking about, and neither do I. What I end with, which is a larger point, which is that, to me, the biggest problem with his point is the certainty with which he's saying you are all wrong. I just have seen for way too long that scientists who invoke a little bit of doubt, I could be right, I could be wrong, there are degrees of uncertainty, plus or minus within certain acceptable levels of error. This is actually a wonderful quality, and I'm tired of seeing people's weaknesses presented as strengths. Sorry, I said that backwards. I'm tired of seeing people's strengths presented as weakness. But I am actually also tired of the converse. I'm sick that William H. presents his weakness as his strength. His weakness is his certainty and his appropriating of facts, and he's like, hey, this is a strength. Look how strong I am. Look how sure of myself I am. You know, that's just, I think it's a weakness. He can try to say it's a strength. I don't believe it. He can try to say that right is left. He can try to say that up is down, but I'm not convinced by that argument. I think that's a rhetorical perversion that has been unleashed on the public as a consequence of this debate, and I think it needs to be undone, and I think it's bullshit. Anytime you see someone in this sphere talking as if they're 100% certain and you're wrong and they know what they're talking about, that person is full of shit. Scientists are humble and they're nerdy and they acknowledge that they might be wrong, but this is our very best guess. That's the nature of this. It's our best guess. No one has a better guess. I'm betting everything on this guess because that's what the experts say. With that, I achieved my top comment, and that's because I'm interested in mastering debating.